Joining us at the desk now to go through the company's results is the company's CEO, Piet van Zyl. Piet, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Let's get straight into things here. I mean, we're looking at the results. Revenue up 16%, profit after tax up 260%, earnings per share up 250%. Take us through the year that was, because on a headline basis, things seem very impressive, but you've also got once-off and adjustments to consider.
Alishia, York came out of aggressive restructuring over the past 3 years. And the plans that we put in place in the second year, we've delivered on during this year 2012. So fundamentally what we managed to get right from a processing facility is we managed to bring our processing plants on a competitive basis, not just locally but also international, to see how we can actually function in a very competitive environment. And then secondly, you know, we have a plantation asset which is on an average age class is quite young. So it is a management decision to see if you rather would let your plantation grow at this stage or to harvest it. And what we've decided effectively is that to put our plantation back on hold and rather buy in supply from third-party players and not to cut our own timber.
Piet, it's Lindsay in Cape Town. Welcome to Power Lunch. The debt situation is an interesting one to me, and obviously in these times of very easy monetary policy worldwide, and people looking for yield and people looking to restructure companies like yours debt. Tell us about your debt restructuring and how important that is to you.
Lindsay, it was quite important because when York was acquired Global Forest Products, there was a consortium of lenders that we had a specific debt package with certain covenants put in place. It was quite difficult for us to manage the business optimally with those covenants that was put in place. Remember when it was done, the world was very well and there was no recession and everybody was very bullish about the outlooks. What we effectively have sat down and did is that we had to renegotiate the covenants. York was never in a position not to be in default of any payments, but it's the covenant measures that put us at odds that we had to tap into a plantation resource. So the refinancing package was more to create flexibility of the business. Remember, we also did a rights issue during this period and the shareholders oversubscribed the rights issue. So they backed the company in terms of what the company in value provides them. So restructuring of debt is not there just to make more profit, it's also to align the business or debt to what the business needs are at that point in time. So in the refinance package of Land Bank, we carefully set out, extended the loan period, relaxed the covenants in order to allow York the ability to buy in lock supplies from third-party players. But please remember, to do that, we had to turn our processing plants around, and we've done so successfully this past year. And that's the key success of York. We generate sufficient cash, which puts York's up in the right position in order for its growth plan going forward.
Okay, just taking a look at the business moving forward. I mean, you say that you're going to be looking at exploring future growth opportunities. Where exactly are you casting your eye right now?
Alishia, we're looking first and foremost locally in South Africa. I've heard the previous debate about Southern Africa. One of our fastest growing markets are Southern Africa. You know, and we're playing a huge part of our growth comes from those markets. But effectively, in terms of the sawmilling and processing, solid wood processing, that industry is very fragmented. You know, there's a limited availability of fiber, and we think in terms of being competitive on the back of South Africa being a net importer of lumber and plywood, we need to look at the Consolidation option in terms of future competitiveness. Yeah. So it's first looking at home and then potentially looking at the other West and East African markets.
Piet, you mentioned a couple of times the word you said is consolidation. Is there any chance that consolidation within the world industry in your sector, that looking at these headline numbers, perhaps bigger world players could say, wow, that's an attractive morsel? Is there a danger that you may be a target instead of just a consolidator taker over in the South African environment?
That's a very good question. That risk definitely sits there. We had approaches from other players already, specifically from South America. Everybody sees Southern Africa as a big market. Yes. If you just look at the backlog in terms of infrastructure and the housing needs, you know, it's quite clear, although, you know, we look at the banks and how they report and the negative sentiment about housing. But fundamentally, if you look at that need that sits there, you know why these companies would love to invest in a company like York. Our current shareholder base is quite bullish about the business. They would like to stay in the company, and they've challenged management team to put that growth plan on the table, which we've done so. So yes, it's quite a comprehensive, but not to be overzealous here and just for the sake of doing certain things. We carefully have developed a strategic plan. How are we going to go into these markets?
Right. And one other question, from an environmental point of view, you know, the woods that are mostly grown here in plantations are not indigenous to South Africa. Is there any move within the industry to try and replace the indigenous forest, which has been really chopped down, and just to replace the natural balance? Or is that not your responsibility?
No, it is very much our responsibility. Good. We have 94,000 hectares, of which 2/3 are planted from a commercial basis. So the other third of those hectares is what we call conservation area. Yes. It's very much part and parcel of our environmental credentials to look after those areas. So we maintain them. You know, we look after the indigenous bush wherever we can. We replant trees, you know, from South Africa. So it's very much part and parcel of our environmental agenda to maintain that credentials. We fully FSC certified, but FSC is not just on the planted areas, it's also on these conservation areas. Yes. So all our red data species being mapped out, your practices, how you look after those areas, your fire breaks, preventative measures, all of these, your alien species, all of those things, including pests as well. Please, just not just trees. Yes, sure. It's also other pests that comes into those areas, and we control those. So it's very much part of your responsibility as a company to maintain those areas.
That's very encouraging to hear you taking those responsibilities so seriously. Thank you.
Piet, it's Lindsay. Just looking at the lumber price, I remember you used to look at lumber futures many years ago, and actually spoke to your company about doing some hedging. What's it been like? I mean, it seems to be a sort of divergence between the performances of different commodities recently, and I always think lumber is a very interesting commodity price because it's very much linked to the housing market. It may even be a leading indicator to what the real economy is doing. How's it treated you recently?
Lindsay, the lumber market has been very good for York, specifically over the last year. Our volume sales went up 14% in lumber, and plywood went up 8% just in volume terms. And on top of that, there was a lumber price index increase of about 3%. So if you put those things together, they treated the company very well. And if you look at the sentiment out the housing market, it's very negative. So you start asking yourself, you look at that pipeline, when people talk about the building plans passed, it's all very negative. You look at what the banks say about the credit lending ratios. However, we didn't experience that. So we like to look at the market in terms of that so-called unrecorded sector. And I don't want to use the word informal, but it's an unrecorded sector. And that's what's been driving the use of products like cement. Remember, lumber is not the only one. Cement sales also went up over the same period, which is quite confusing if you look at the real key indicators in terms of the statistical indicators.
Absolutely, and your experience confusing if you look at some of the commentary and rhetoric coming out of our major construction players as well. Piet, a pleasure chatting to you this afternoon. Thanks so much for your time. Of course, Piet van Zyl is CEO of York.